Well, welcome, everybody. It's good to see those of you who are here. And today we're going to be talking about listening. So I should just stop and listen to you. Anyway, for preparation for our Meekoff lecture, Kelly has prepared a couple of different classes. Last week it was about belonging, and this week it's about listening. And next week with Nancy, it's about curiosity. And the idea is, the overarching idea is, oh, let me close the door. Maybe somebody could close both doors, because I know that you guys have trouble hearing when those doors are open. The idea is Larissa Kwong Abazia is going to be talking about communal change and how we affect that. That could be in any way, whether we want to change the way we act within our community and support each other as our life changes, or also how we interact with the community around us and maybe change as time goes on because the community is changing around us. So today we're going to listen to David Brooks, and he has a new book. Some of you may know him if you watch PBS, because he's on every Friday with his political opinions. This has nothing to do with political opinions, but this book is called How to Know a Person, The Art of Seeing Others and Being Deeply Seen. And Nancy heard him speak when he came to Seattle. I didn't, but I discovered it more recently. And a big part of it is about listening. So I wanted to start. Oh, Lynn is here. I'm so glad you're here, Lynn. Yeah. I hope you're feeling better. We're all praying for you. So we're going to start with a 15-minute video by David Brooks. It's an hour-long video, and I had trouble finding the right 15 minutes because the whole thing is worth listening to. So let's get started quickly so that we have more time to discuss. In part also because I'm the liturgist today and I have to leave exactly at 9:50. So let's see what we can get.
As long as
Share screen. So can you all see that?
yes.
Good. All right, so start. Play.
We're often strangers to each other. In any group of people, there are people who are diminishers and there are illuminators. The diminishers are not curious about other people. They stereotype, they ignore.
Audio's pretty low on our end, the remote end.
See if there's a,
Down at the,
that's where it usually is, but I couldn't see it.
I saw it. On the other side,
And I told them,
on the actual video.
Video itself.
yeah.
Okay.
On the left.
Yeah, oh, it is maxed out, it looks like.
Okay, I'm maxing it out. Let's see if we can hear better.
Leave a party and I think, that time nobody asked me a question. And I've come to recognize that my conclusion is that only about 30% of the people you meet are question askers. They persistently are curious about you. The other 70% are perfectly nice people. They're just not questioners. And those are diminishers. Illuminators, on the other hand, are people who are curious about you and make you feel special and lit up.
Down at the right, too.
And so there was a novelist who wrote about 100 years ago named Ian Foster. And his biographer said of him, to speak to him was to be seduced by an inverse charisma, a sense of being
Sorry about it.
listened to with such intensity that you had to be your most honest, sharpest, and best self. Who wouldn't want to be able
Somebody help me.
I think we're fine. I don't think it's you.
Why is it?
I think it's somebody at home.
Oh, somebody home. Can you all put yourself on mute just so that we can make sure that, because it's so hard to hear. I don't know why the volume is, when I was at home, the volume was fine.
Can you just turn it directly up on the computer too?
Well, I just did. I mean, this is.
No, I mean on the, like on mine, it has a little button on the
Oh.
keyboard. No.
Dory, is it possible to start the video over?
Well, the problem is the volume is having a problem, and I don't know
Yeah,
what the problem is.
because it looks like it's good.
It looks like it's on full blast. Let's try again.
Of people, there are people who are diminishers and there are illuminators. The diminishers are not curious about other people. They stereotype, they ignore, they don't ask questions. I sometimes leave a party and I think, you know, that whole time nobody asked me a question. And I've come to recognize that my conclusion is that only about 30% of the people you meet are question askers. They persistently are curious about you. The other 70% are perfectly nice people. They're just not questioners. And those are diminishers. Illuminators, on the other hand, are people who are curious about you and make you feel special and lit up. And so there was a novelist who wrote about 100 years ago named Ian Foster. And his biographer said of him, to speak to him was to be seduced by an inverse charisma, a sense of being listened to with such intensity that you had to be your most honest, sharpest, and best self. Who wouldn't want to be able to bring out that in other people? There's a probably apocryphal story told about Jenny Jerome, who would later go on to become Winston Churchill's mom. And in the late 19th century, when she was a young woman, one night she was seated next to a dinner in London with William Gladstone, the Prime Minister of England. And she left that dinner thinking that Gladstone was the cleverest person in England. Then a couple weeks later, she's seated at a dinner next to Gladstone's great political rival, Benjamin Disraeli. And she left dinner with Disraeli thinking that she was the cleverest person in England. And so it's good to be Gladstone, it's better to be Disraeli. Many of you probably know the vaunted research facility Bell Labs. They had a bunch of researchers, and some of them were just more creative and innovative than others. And they wanted to know why. And so they checked out their IQs, they checked out their educational backgrounds, and they couldn't figure it out. It turned out the most creative researchers were in the habit of having breakfast or lunch every day with a guy named Harry Nyquist, who's an electrical engineer. And he got inside their problems, he got inside their head, he asked them the good questions, and he walked with them as they solved their problems. And so Harry Nyquist is an illuminator. And so how do you get better at being an illuminator? Well, the first thing, whether you're young or more seasoned, is you study the humanities. You study literature, plays, the arts. The humanities are the most, I tell young people, the humanities are the most practical thing you can major in because they teach you about other people. And if you can't understand other people, you'll be miserable, and you'll make people around you miserable. Then, there's a series of steps one should walk through to really get to know somebody well and make them feel respected. And that series of steps begins with the first gaze. You're just encountering somebody, and you're looking at them. When we meet somebody, there's a series of unconscious questions going through our minds. Am I a priority to you? Am I a person to you? Will you respect me? And the answers to those questions are communicated in the eyes before any words come out of your mouth. I was in Waco, Texas several years ago, and I was having lunch with a woman named LaRue Dorsey. And Mrs. Dorsey was a teacher most of her career, and she presented herself to me as this stern disciplinarian, sort of a drill sergeant type. And she told me I loved my students enough to discipline them. And so we're sitting there, and I'm a little intimidated by her. She was tough lady. And into the diner walks a mutual friend of ours named Jimmy Durrell, who's a pastor. He pastors the homeless. And he goes up to her, and he grabs her by the shoulders and shakes her way harder than you should shake a 93-year-old. And he says, Mrs. Dorsey, you're the best, I love you, I love you. And that stern disciplinarian that I had been talking to turns into a bright, eye-shining 9-year-old girl. And so the moral of the story is greet people more like Jimmy and less like me. And that's partly because he's a warm, big personality. But partly the profound thing is this. Jimmy's a pastor, as I mentioned. And so when Jimmy greets anybody, he's greeting anybody made in the image of God. He's looking into the face of God. He's looking at somebody with a soul of infinite value and dignity. He's looking at somebody so important that Jesus was willing to die for that person. Now, you could be Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, atheist, agnostic, I don't care. But greeting each person you meet with that level of reverence and respect is a precondition for seeing them well. To know that each person you meet is not a problem to be solved. They're a mystery that you will never get to the bottom of. So it's that first gaze is so powerful. Attention is a moral act. The kind of attention we cast on the world determines the kind of person we are in the world. So that's the gaze. The second phase of getting to know someone is what I call accompaniment. Most of life is not having deep conversations with other people. It's just hanging out. It's picking up your kids at school or attending a meeting. Accompaniment is an other-centered way of being a normal course of life. We think of the pianist who accompanies a singer. The pianist is there paying attention to the singer. He's there to make her shine. And so we want to have that other-centered way of being. And sometimes it can be just as casual as hanging out. I have friends who say, we like our friends to be lingerable. When they come for dinner, we just want to linger with them. They're fun. That's a great quality of accompaniment. The second is play. When you're playing with someone, you don't have to have deep conversations, whether it's pickleball or Uno or basketball or whatever. But when you're at play, you're yourself. You're more natural. I have friends who I played basketball with, and you can imagine how good I am. And we've never really had deep conversations, but we've had trash talk and high fives, and we pass the ball, and we really sort of know each other. You can see how powerful it was when my oldest son, was about 14 or 12 months, I can't remember. He woke up at 4 in the morning every morning, and I played with him till 10 a.m. when I left. And I remember thinking one day, I know him better than I've ever known anybody. And he's known me better than anybody's known me because I was so emotionally open in play. And no words had crossed between us because he couldn't yet talk. And yet there was a deep bond between us. Sometimes accompaniment is just being present. It's just showing up at the right time. So I had a student a couple years ago, 2 years ago, named Jillian Sawyer. And Jillian's dad died of pancreatic cancer while she was in college. And as he was dying, they talked about the fact that he would probably miss some of the big events of her life, like her wedding. And after college, she was a bridesmaid at a friend's wedding. And she went through the wedding. She watched the father give a toast to his daughter, a beautiful toast, the father of the bride. And then it came time for the father-daughter dance. And she just didn't want to sit through that, so she left the table and went to the restroom quietly just to have a cry. And when she came out of the restroom, all the people at her table and the adjacent table had gotten up and were just standing by the door of the restroom. And she wrote this in a paper that she gave me permission to quote from. What I will remember forever is that no one said a word. Each person, including newer boyfriends who I knew less well, gave me a reaffirming hug and headed back to their table. No one lingered or awkwardly tried to validate my grief. They were there for me, just for a moment, and it was exactly what I needed. That's a beautiful example of just the art of presence, just showing up for somebody. So that's the second phase. The third phase is conversation. You have to be really good conversationalists to get to know other people and to have the kind of encounters you want to have. And so how good are you at conversation? Well, again, I don't know you that well, but you're probably not as good as you think you are. It's easy to have bad conversations. That's two people making statements at each other. That's a bad conversation. A good conversation goes somewhere. People say something and the other person says, yeah, that's good, let me build on that. And then build on that, build on that. And we started at one place, we ended up over here. I asked a bunch of conversation experts, what are some tips to become a better conversationalist? And they gave me a bunch, a few of which I'll repeat here. One, treat attention as an on-off switch, not a dimmer. It should be 100% attention or 0%, but not 60%. Two, be a loud listener. I have a buddy named Andy Crouch who lives in Swarthmore. And when you're talking to him, it's like talking to a Pentecostal church. He's like, amen, brother, preach that. And I just love talking to that guy. Make them authors, not witnesses. When people tell you a story, they don't go into enough detail. And so if you say, well, where was your boss sitting when she said that to you? Suddenly they're narrating you a story. You want to get people in a story mode. Even in journalism, I no longer ask people, what do you believe about this? I ask them, how did you come to believe that about this? That's it. They start telling me a story about some experience they had or some person who've shaped their values. A much better conversation. Don't fear the pause. If we're in conversation and I make a comment that starts at my shoulder and goes to my fingertips, at what point have you stopped listening so you can start thinking what you're going to say in response? Probably here. So let me talk to my fingertips, and then pause, and then you can have a thoughtful response. Don't be a topper. Topping is when you say something about how you're having problems with your teenage son, and I say, I know exactly what you're going through. I'm having problems with my Tommy. It sounds like I'm trying to relate, but what I'm really doing is say, I don't really care about your problems. Let me talk about my own. And so don't be a topper. 2 final ones. Keep the gem statement in the center. When we have an argument, there's usually something deep down we agree upon. If my brother and I are arguing about our dad's health care, we both want what's best for our dad. And so if we could keep that point of agreement, the gem statement in the center, you save a relationship in the midst of an argument. And then the final one is find the disagreement under the disagreement. When we disagree about something like tax policy, there's probably some philosophical reason we see it differently. So let's explore what that is. It's a more fun way to have a conversation. Finally, the quality of your conversation depends on the quality of the questions you ask. And so we should get really good at asking great questions. Now, kids are phenomenal at asking questions. I have a friend named Naomi Way who teaches 7th grade boys in New York how to be interviewers, how to ask questions. Her first day in class, she said, okay, you guys can ask me anything and I'll answer honestly. First question from a 7th grade boy, are you married? No. Second question, are you divorced? Yes. Third question, do you still love him? Her eyes widen. She says, yes. Fourth question, does he know? Do your kids know? By now she's crying. So kids are great questioners. And as adults, we get a little shy about it. Too shy, in my view. And so we want to get good at asking questions. And sometimes you're just getting to know someone. You're not going to ask some deep, profound question. I ask people sometimes, like, I always ask people where you're from, or where'd you get your name, or tell me your favorite unimportant thing about yourself. I learned from that question, an academic I revere watches a lot of trashy TV, but that's his favorite unimportant thing about him. But you want the questions to be open-ended storytelling questions. So I read in a book called You're Not Listening by Keith Murphy about a focus group moderator who was hired by grocery stores to find out why people are coming into the grocery stores late at night. And she could have just said, tell me, why do you go to grocery stores late at night to the focus group? Instead, she said, tell me about the last time you went to a grocery store after 11 p.m. And one lady who'd been quiet through the whole focus group said, well, I had smoked a joint, and I wanted a menage a trois with me, Ben, and Jerry. And so you got a little glimpse into her life. Once you get to know somebody, my favorite questions are ones that take them out of their daily experience and get them 30,000 feet looking at their life. And so it's like, what crossroads are you at? Most of us are in some life transition. What crossroads are you at? If this 5 years of your life is a chapter, what's the chapter about? What would you do if you weren't afraid? I had a friend who was being interviewed for a job, and at the end of the interview, he said to the interviewer, what would you do if you weren't afraid? And the lady burst out crying, because she wouldn't be doing HR at that company. I asked my students at Yale, what would you do if you weren't afraid? And every year, 2 or 3 say, well, I wouldn't be at Yale. It's not the right school for me, but I need the prestige. And so fear governs all our lives to some degree. Peter Block, who writes about community, has some great questions, but you really have to know people to ask these ones. What's the no or refusal you keep postponing? What's the commitment you've made you no longer really believe in? What's the gift you hold in exile? What talent do you have that you're not using? These are deep questions. I once had a dinner party, and my wife thought I was really pretentious, but it worked. I asked, how do your ancestors show up in your life? Because we've all been shaped by our ancestors, and there was a Dutch family, and they talked about their Dutch heritage. There was a black family, they talked about the African-American experience. I talked about Jewish heritage. And it was a great conversation, because we all knew we were affected by our heritages, but we hadn't really pinned it down, so we had a great conversation talking about that. And so these are the easy parts of getting to know somebody under the normal circumstances of life.
Okay, we're not gonna talk about the hard questions. Only the easy questions. All right, let me stop sharing. Okay, can you all, I'm sorry about the volume, it's about listening. And the volume was too small, too low. Could you hear enough at least to get a sense of that? Jack, I see your face, yeah. And we could hear eventually when I turned it up a little bit.
3 different places to.
Yeah, that's too complex.
Yes, so diminishers and illuminators. Let's start with that. What did you think of that idea? Chris?
What immediately came to mind is I have I guess, brother-in-law, my sister-in-law's husband, and he would be close to an illuminator, and that's one of the reasons you like being around him, because he does ask questions with the curiosity that he actually wants to know the answer, and he's not going to go on to his little story. It's just a connection, you know, whereas other people in the family are definitely, you know, not that way. And so,
Diminishers, 70% of us, right?
diminishers, and so, you know, when I set the table for holidays, we can't all fit at the one table, and I always have the in-laws sit at the same table, and it's sort of selfish, but because then I get to sit with Ted. I'll feel good.
I thought you were gonna say you put him right in the middle of the big table.
No.
No.
Yeah, that's real sharing. Sure, I use the excuse that I think the siblings should sit at the same table, and then it's splitting the families, but anyway.
What about others? Illuminators or diminishers?
I can think of some people like our daughter's piano teacher was a person that just, you could just tell she was just really focused on you when you were talking to her and just very interested in everything. And yeah, there's a few people that I can think of who are illuminators. And I always think, gee, I wish I could be more like that. So I'm one of the people that's always kind of thinking, okay, what am I going to say? Because I'm nervous about, you know, I have to say something intelligent.
But maybe
Yeah,
just ask
but-
a question.
Yeah.
That's an interesting
Yeah.
takeaway. Mike, were you gonna say something?
Well, yeah, if you're gonna be an illuminator, you have to have, kind of a peace of mind that, you know, he also talked about this concept of topper, always trying to say
Yeah.
something, you know, trying that. But you just have to have peace of mind and confidence, you know, self-assuredness, I guess, a little bit, that you can hear this conversation.
But also confidence that the other person actually is an interesting person.
Yeah.
And just maybe just assume that, as opposed to thinking, well, I've talked to this person before, they really don't have much to say. But just to assume that maybe they have something to say that you never heard them say before.
One of the thoughts I had when, during the David Brooks's presentation was that it's really hard for me to have a conversation about politics with somebody I don't agree with. Because you just have nothing in between to agree about. And his point, I want to move on, his point about finding the gem inside there, what the root, you know, why do you believe? And I remember trying to have a conversation with a conservative person just during a luncheon. And I said, surely the government plays a role of leveling the playing field for, you know, we were talking about something about economics. And he didn't agree with that. And it's sort of like, he, from my point of view, said there's no such thing as gravity. And I just, all of a sudden I had nothing.
Right.
But I love this. How did you come to have that belief? If you're like,
Right.
instead of why do you believe that?
How could you
I don't,
believe it?
how could you believe it? But
How could you be so stupid?
well, that's interesting. That's not the way I see it. How did you come to that belief?
Yeah.
That the government is not to be trusted or whatever, or well, just don't put words in their mouth.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe that's a thought for,
All right, that conversation that started out immediately came to a halt because I, you know, I, I remember trying to have a conversation with a conservative person just during a luncheon. And he didn't agree with that. And it's sort of like, I mean, I just, all of a sudden I had nothing. And I, immediately came to a halt because I You know,
Couldn't think of the next thing.
Well, but actually, it's sort of like, what he's saying is there's a philosophical disagreement that's not really about who's gonna be the next president. It would be, oh, that's really interesting. I have my philosophy that government can help. Tell me more about your philosophy that government is the problem.
tell me more.
Well, what's your personal experience with
There you go.
that has led you to believe that?
Mhm.
Yeah, sometimes it's just, that's what they were taught, but other times maybe they went through
And
something.
then remind them that they had the GI Bill and no.
Yes. Well, there's Lynn. You look so healthy. I can't believe you were under the knife just a few days ago. You smiling and looking
She
healthy?
looks great.
You're muted. I'd love to hear your voice.
Oh, goodness. Well, I don't want to occupy the conversation because I'm enjoying this one so much. And at first I couldn't get my camera going or unmute, but here I am. I managed to push the right button, I guess. And it's so good to see you all. And yes, I'm feeling really good, just kind of tired. And I did too much yesterday because I felt much better yesterday than I should have, I guess. But everything was just kind of miraculous. So I'm still somewhat astonished by my experience because it turned out totally different from what I imagined. Yeah, so it was a marvelous experience going under the knife and coming out of it and finding out what we found out. So, yeah.
Which is that there was no cancer and that
Yeah, yeah.
your
So
whole prognosis was totally different.
yes, and so my whole outlook now is different. I was making different plans based on the diagnosis, and to find out that the diagnosis didn't seem to be accurate was quite a miracle to me. So, yeah, we'll find out more, I guess, in 2 weeks, but right now they say no cancer. So no chemo. They told me I was going to have chemo too, and I wasn't looking forward to that. And so he said, no cancer, no chemo. So I feel pretty good about that.
Hmm.
Yes, back to David Brooks, though. I mean, he is really an illuminator, and you too, Dory. I know you as a journalist can certainly illuminate your subjects. Mhm.
Well, that gets to one of my reactions when I first heard this, I've listened to it several times, is that because I was trained as a journalist, I do ask a lot of questions, although I've learned a lot about the gaze. I mean, he goes into it in so much more depth than I ever did. But I have been accused of asking too many questions. I thought, maybe after listening to him, maybe I'm just asking the wrong questions. Maybe a deeper question is really what's called for. And particularly with that particular person that says that about me. I don't associate that with journalism to really go deep and say, how did you come to that experience?
I think that's part of it, but also maybe how many questions. And by
Oh.
asking a deeper question, you're asking less questions.
Good point.
too, So it wouldn't feel, now,
That's a
I'm
good-
not saying that I feel like that with you at all. Absolutely not, but I'm just saying.
At least not today, anyway.
It's encouraging to me that that's, because when you're working on being a coach, it's the same thing, you're asking them, but you don't want to pepper them with questions. You don't want to just be blah, 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 because that's almost like you're going somewhere, with it instead of really.
So in training as
Yeah.
a coach, is
Yeah.
this the kind of thing that you learn?
Oh, yeah, not to the degree he's talking about, but so I could watch this a lot of times.
So is this to coach teachers?
Yeah, the coaching teachers. yeah.
Well, I liked how, just framing and just what everybody's saying, he talked about the idea to ask the questions was to get the person to narrate more of their own story.
Mhm.
And then for us to sit and be with them and listen to their story. And I kind
But
of.
wait, my story's better than yours. Sorry.
I kind of love that idea because if I keep that kind of off here as I'm thinking about wanting to know more, then the questions can be more about what would allow me to understand their story a little bit more versus how do I connect with them?
Mm,
You know, and then allow the connection to flow out of better understanding them and their story,
mhm,
instead of our similarities.
mm. What about the one where you wait until, right at this point, you're ready to, you always do think of your next statement, right? Oh, I have some insight into that. And then to actually wait and keep your insight to yourself for a while and wait till they get there and then ask a question based on what they said as opposed to our experience.
And allow a pause in there.
And
not to
allow a
just
pause, boy,
interrupt at the funny bone, right?
yes.
Or even to just make yourself not think of the
Right.
response, you know, that's, I mean, that's the
Because
problem,
part of,
right, right? You know, you're processing what they're saying, but you're too fast, processing too fast, you know, so that's why you have the statement.
and that it's an on off, think of it as an on off
Yeah.
and not a dimmer. So
Yeah.
you, instead of dimming at this point because you're off in your own brain, just keep the switch on all the way to the end. That's kind of amazing. Did someone else have a comment online, Mary?
Well, I was thinking about when I was working at the hospital, one of the things that the head of my department was talking with, particularly to the nurses, but also to other management folk, was when you approach a conversation, don't already have the answer.
Hmm.
You have an expectation, or you think you know what the other person's going to say, so you don't hear what they say, nor do you respond to it, and that's a fear-based thing, but it's also a control thing. I want this sort of an answer from you, and in a hospital and trying to keep things functioning, it's not about getting to know individuals, it's about getting to know what's going on and who's, what's your next move and what happened and that kind of thing with regard to care. But don't have the already sense in your mind that you already know what they're going to say. That really makes a difference if you stop and think about it. When you see someone who looks like they're very tired, don't already assume they're already tired.
Hmm.
They haven't said they're tired. That's what you think they say. That's your thinking, not what they have said. So she used to use the term already thinking. Already. I already know what you're going to say. But I'm going to ask you anyway. That's not uncommon.
That's really helpful.
That he should have had that one on there.
Yeah, but that's more in a not in a personal interactive situation. It's more in a business or daily thing where information is really what you're talking about. You don't really often have time to get into, how did you get to be where you are? There's not the time for that as a rule, which is unfortunate, but that's a piece of it.
But what about the gaze? Did you hear something new with the gaze? Anybody?
Well, I did. I liked that so very much. I liked what he said about the pastor. When he greeted people, he saw people as the image of God.
Mhm.
And I was thinking of that thought that I think came through F. Scott Peck about conversation being the sex act of the soul. And I have liked that a lot. And then in this conversation, though, I've been thinking, no, good conversation is not a sex act, it's love making.
There you go. Much
Really
better.
love making. Yeah. And so first of all, you have to look at the person and you
Go out to dinner, do something with the person and just be present.
right, and you find something to love in that person. And then from there on, you can graduate into lovemaking, and in making love, there's some result from that generally. And it's not just for the sake of the one person who's participating, it's for both. And then perhaps there is some fruit of the womb that comes from that we don't even know. So, yes, this whole, well, I love David Brooks to begin with, and he does prompt a lot of good thinking. He is really an illuminator, I think, as are all of you. My goodness. Yeah, that's it.
Jack,
Just adding kind of to Mike's concern about engaging someone in conversation who obviously has a different point of view than your. I think some of the tips that David gave about sort of keeping the conversation going, like how did you come to believe that, or how did you come to think that about that, something like that, as a way to sort of keep it a little bit open ended and give you a chance to maybe seek some commonality, some agreement. I think those kind of tips are really helpful.
what about within the church or as we do our church work or reaching out to community? Are there any learnings from David Brooks for that? Or is this just, mostly he's talking about interpersonal and just because it feels good to know people better. But if there's a bigger purpose and with a bigger community, Nancy?
Well, I just remember when I was at Seattle University and we were in a class that most of the individuals in the class were either going to be in counseling or they were going to be pastors. And it was, about having conversations with people. And one of the things the instructor talked about, and it just was so evident during this time, was the idea that when you're in a conversation with someone, the Holy Spirit, as we think about from a Christian standpoint, is there with you. And so if we leave room in the conversation, both the silence of it and the places where we're talking with each other, for the Holy Spirit to also bring about the creative process, and then it flows out of that. That's part of it. So it's like three in the conversation versus just two people.
And that gets to the question of trust, just trusting that if you're open, something else will happen and you don't need to jump in with this thought that occurred to you at the.
So the Holy Spirit was there with Mike and the gravity guy. Possibly.
Kelly, do you have any insights on listening that you could share with us?
Oh, how much time do you need? I think, as Mary was talking about, doing hospital chaplaincy, a week ago and a year ago, so about a year ago was when I was starting my unit of hospital chaplaincy. And I remember the other two people in my cohort were having a lot of issues with jumping into conversation too fast, because it's a very uncomfortable setting. The person in the bed is not wearing a lot of clothes. They have a lot going on. You never know when you're going to be interrupted by doctors and nurses and all those kinds of things. And I remember my supervisor kept saying, you need to slow down. And I think as you were talking, Nancy, about leaving room for the Holy Spirit. Oftentimes I would get feedback that there was too much silence, that patients weren't sure what to do or why I was there. And I said, yeah, that's like, this is on purpose, because this isn't about my agenda or what I came into this room to accomplish. Really, I had no specific goal. I'm just here to be present with you. And it's amazing, it's uncomfortable for all of us to sit in some silence and to leave some room for the Holy Spirit. And yet I feel like I had deeper visits, or my verbatims at least, were a lot longer, as you can imagine, because we had much deeper conversations when all of a sudden it's not just, well, how are you doing? Why are you here? But instead you leave a little bit of room and you figure out they're not just worried about recovering from the surgery they just had. It turns out they're also really worried about where they're going home to, because of this difficult relationship with such and such a person, and they're not sure how to reconcile it. And that's just a whole different conversation than, I'm so sorry that you're sick in the hospital. And so I think there's a lot of benefit to challenging ourselves to sitting with some silence and to, feeling the comfort and the trust build with one another so that we can actually get to something deeper. And it reminds me of one other story, and then I'll stop just rambling. But I was serving a church one summer in southwest or southeast Florida. And we did a lot of work with houseless folks. So they had a whole system set up in the back of the church for donations, and they could get a meal and all these sorts of things. And I may have told this story to some of you before, but one day I was helping to hand out goods, and they had socks and they had gloves, but no one wanted gloves because it's summer in Florida. And this one gentleman cursed me out. And he said, "Why do you keep giving me these effing socks? I don't want this." And I was like, "I'm so sorry. Like, I have nothing to do with this program. I'm just a volunteer who's giving some time." And he said, "No one has even asked us what we need. What we do need is lotion because it's so hot and we're so dry and so much of our bodies are exposed so much of the time. But instead you just keep giving us more and more socks because you think that's what we need."
Nobody listened, nobody asked the
No one had
question.
even asked what they needed or what, we just made these assumptions, or maybe they asked somebody 20 years ago and that one person wanted socks and now there's this whole big bin and that's what we primarily give out. It was amazing to me, and that sticks out to me, especially as we engage the community in work and in conversation. This is not about what we think you need, but it really is a partnership and being able to listen and contribute to one another, so that we can both show up and see what the Holy Spirit's going to do. So don't just give out socks. That's the lesson.
Mary,
Yeah, Kelly made me remember, of course, in the hospital setting, but this could be any time when you're talking with someone, when people start to say something that is about their level of pain, of emotional pain. Usually it is really easy to get uncomfortable, and without thinking about it, whatever you say and do takes them out of that. And it's because you have your own level of pain, or because you don't want to be in pain with them, which you really aren't. But to listen to someone who is suffering emotionally, however, means there will be times when it is very hard to listen. And I agree with the silence is the biggest deal. That'll help the most. And the worst thing you can do is offer a Kleenex.
oh, who
You
knew?
take them out of their tears because you're worried about them, so you're going to take care of them. That's about you. It's not about them. Unless they ask for something, let their nose run, which is not an easy thing to watch.
Or it can show that you're uncomfortable that their nose is running. And so it's what I'm uncomfortable with. Absolutely.
Yeah, so my offering something to wipe their nose with is about me. It's not about them. They didn't ask for it. And it changes the subject. Little things like that. Movement, how you whether you're facing somebody with your whole body. Where are your hands? Are your arms crossed? Are your hands clasped? There are so many messages we send with our bodies, way like he said, with your eyes when you greet people. The messages with our bodies are immensely, that's the first thing anybody sees. It's not and with us in the hospital, it was try to get down to their level. Don't stand above them, looking down on them. If you can do it, sit as much as you can wherever there is a place to sit, to bring your head down close to their level. A lot of little things like that are physical really make a difference whether somebody's going to be responsive to what you say or your questions, because your questions won't have meaning if your body doesn't go along with it.
That does get to David Brooks talking first about the gaze and then about accompaniment, which is what Mary was talking about, and also Kelly, just being present.
Yeah.
People. And then it's about the questions. So I guess a lot of us forget about step 1 and step 2. And it's not just gaze, it's how you're holding your body.
Yeah, and the questions won't go anywhere if your body is saying something else.
Wow.
It will not. They will not have anything to say to you, or what they have to say is once over lightly. It's not really what's going on. And what she was saying is, which is very true. You start out with a conversation because somebody's been in ICU for weeks, and they're finally get to be out of ICU, and and you go in to talk to them. And the good news was that this woman says, well, but you know what's really bothering me? I didn't have to ask. I didn't have to push for that. Her middle son wouldn't have anything to do with her.
Mm.
It didn't bother her at all that her lungs were so shot. It was
Mm.
because of her son. And the good news is that she came up with that. I hadn't really pushed toward it, but it made me remember
Mm.
what's really going on. 99% of the time in the hospital is something else besides what they're admitted for.
Wow.
I guess picking up on that, Mary, I think that silence probably kind of provides that opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're all, I find myself really uncomfortable in certain situations with silence, like somebody should be saying something now. So I'll blurt out something just to fill the silence. So I think there's a technique that we could learn about being comfortable in an encounter with a little bit of silence.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yes.
Jack, I was thinking that in the safe parking interactions that you've had, is probably a lot of times you don't know what question to ask, and maybe a gaze and some listening, is just listening, accompaniment. Have you found that there are stories that come out if you're just open?
Some, yes, some would kind of like to avoid conversation,
Mm.
but the
Which is
trick is
also a way of respecting them, right?
it's to establish that comfort level of trust so that conversation can flow. There's others with whom you wish you had a way to kind of slow them down a little bit. You know, they come out with their life story every time you meet them. But I think the silence is something I'm going to try to develop more comfortable with, and I think it'll have maybe more positive result in terms of having others feeling more comfortable speaking.
More respected, yeah. Okay, well, it is actually 9:50. We don't usually end on time, but I'm going to be the liturgist today. So we do need to end on time, but thank you so much. One last comment from Mary and then we'll go.
Oh, no, I'm just saying goodbye.
Oh, okay.
Oh, and next week will be slightly different, but still on curiosity, but it'll be on curiosity, conversations, and lifelong learning.
Curiosity, conversations, and lifelong learning. Who wouldn't come back for that? So Nancy will be leading the class next week, and thank you all for